15 years after their first team-up in X-Men Origins left fans with a whole lot to be desired. Ryan Reynolds as the Merc with the Mouth has finally come back alongside Hugh Jackman as the clawed Canadian X-Man to shoot and slash their way across the MCU alongside a whole lot of cameos in their long-awaited and R-rated adventure, Deadpool and Wolverine. And with its record-breaking box office and great reviews being a much-needed win for Marvel Studios, along with their X-Men cartoon revival getting huge numbers on Disney+, Wolverine and the X-Men will surely have a bright future ahead of them in their new universe. Unlike the dark end that came for their franchise with their fourth and final prequel from their days with 20th Century Fox, which began in 2000 with Bryan Singer's X-Men and ended in 2019 with X-Men Dark Phoenix, or as it was titled on all the trailers and posters for some reason, Dark Phoenix. After 2016's Apocalypse was a disappointing step down financially and critically, with Bryan Singer yet again leaving the franchise due to, reasons, it was now up to longtime franchise writer and producer Simon Kinberg to end the younger adventures of Professor X and his mutants on yet another adaptation of Chris Claremont's beloved Dark Phoenix saga, a storyline previously adapted by Kinberg in co-writing the script for Brett Ratner's disappointing third entry, The Last Stand, which had just been canonically wiped from existence in Days of Future Past. But instead of the free-film saga he wanted, Kinberg was forced to will things down for one last movie before the X-Men's MCU merger, which ironically came out after several reshoots and delays in June 2019, just 1 month after Avengers Endgame was still breaking box office records for the X-Men's future corporate overlords. Thus, Dark Phoenix would set its own box office records for the lowest opening weekend and worst overall gross of Fox's X-Men franchise. On top of foul reviews from critics and fans alike, who have largely ranked Dark Phoenix as among the worst of the saga, even worse than the two movies which had to be retconned out of existence. Well, as a lifelong fan of the X-Men saga myself, let us find out how Dark Phoenix was such a flameout of a finale for this franchise, as well as competing it up against The Last Stand to see which of them is the least terrible Dark Phoenix saga. And no, JoBlo subscribers, I am not going to bother reviewing the other bad X-Men movie that came out later to even worse reception after its own numerous delays, and which barely even counts as an X-Men movie anyway. The only way that you could make the New Mutants less boring is if Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman were to record an audio commentary over it, in character as Deadpool and Wolverine.
Soundtrack is a real banger, am I right? That's right.
Oh, God.
Just like that. He is awful. Yeah, not a good idea, no.
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the Store tab on any of our JoBlo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
Time to take advantage of Deadpool's promotional tie-in with Heineken and wash down those chimichangas with a round of the awfully good drinking game. Take a shot or drink as we open between the events of the last two movies in 1975. When an 8-year-old Jean Grey is asking her parents in the front seat of their car if they can switch the radio from playing Glenn Campbell's By the Time I Get to Phoenix.
I understood that reference.
And her telekinesis starts going out of control just as Mom crashes their car into an oncoming truck, which Jean mentally shields herself from while her parents have seemingly died up front. This would have been an awkward time to have Stan Lee making one last cameo as the guy driving that truck. Hey man! Make love now! She's visited in the hospital by James McAvoy, returning as the pre-bald Charles Xavier, here to offer Jean Grey a new home at his school for gifted youngsters such as herself.
I can help you.
Where Professor X can teach her to hone her mutant powers as a fellow psychic.
I think you can fix me too.
You are not broken.
I actually preferred this intro between young Xavier and Jean Grey to the one that they had in The Last Stand. Probably because there's no horribly aged de-aging effects on Ian McKellen's face this time, so first point goes in favor to Dark Phoenix. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Wolverine. You still have the rest of the movie to catch up on your score. Then we fast forward all the way to 1992, when things appear to have changed for mutant acceptance for the better. The X-Men now have a cheering crowd of fans following them around on their rescue missions, and Professor X now has a direct phone line connecting him to the President of the United States.
Mr. President.
You seeing this on TV?
Played here by musical theater actor Brian Darcy James, in a role only credited as the President, despite the last 3 prequels taking place during real-life presidencies? Could Fox not spring a little more budget to afford Dana Carvey doing his killer George Bush impression?
Not gonna do it. Wouldn't be prudent at this juncture.
So when the real-life launch of the space shuttle Endeavour happens to go awry, Xavier sends out his dear friend Hank McCoy, aka Beast, played again by a pre-Lex Luthor Nicholas Hoult. Wow, he went from a comic book character who's all hair to one who's got no hair, to lead the X-Men alongside his fellow Blue Mutant, Raven, aka Mystique, played again by a particularly unenthusiastic-looking Jennifer Lawrence, out on a rescue mission to save the shuttle's astronauts.
So we're going to space.
Yes, Kurt?
We're doing space missions now. Cool.
No need to ask how the X-Men have mastered intergalactic space travel beyond our own space program's capabilities. Let us instead reintroduce ourselves to our reassembled X-Men babies. There's Sophie Turner replacing Famke Janssen as the older Jean Grey, aka Firebird. Then there's Ty Sheridan donning James Marsden's red goggles as Scott Summers, aka Laserhead. Alexandra Shipp sporting the Kenyan accent that Halle Berry didn't even bother with as Aurora Monroe, aka Weather Woman. Cody Smith-McPhee taking Alan Cummings' place under his own blue paint job as Kurt Wagner, aka Blue Beetle. And of course, returning from the last 2 prequels, Evan Peters as Peter Maximoff, aka my favorite of the X-Men, Jeffrey Dahmer.
We're gonna hang out. Gonna watch a movie.
And they do not come off too badly in their first action sequence here, as they're all using their respective abilities in creative ways to save the astronauts. It's certainly a better real-life event from the 90s to insert the X-Men into than, say, the Rodney King riots.
Kurt, where is she? Where is she?
Uh-oh, looks like Jean Grey's been left behind with the ship just as it's about to collide with an oncoming alien cloud, whose solar energy gets sucked inside Jean's body just before the ship explodes, from which Jean somehow survives in perfect condition and able to breathe out in space.
Is everybody okay?
Okay.
Well, that is the last time Professor X accepts any more field trip ideas from Miss Frizzle and her little brats on the magic school bus.
Seatbelts, everyone!
As you may have noticed, Jennifer Lawrence is giving the most visibly checked out performance in a sequel since Chevy Chase in Caddyshack 2. And you kind of understand, seeing how big of a star she had become in between X-Men movies, and how vocal she's been about Bryan Singer's misbehavior on the last 2 films.
I mean, I've worked with Bryan Singer. I've seen emotional men.
Still, it's a bummer to see Raven go from her mutant and proud attitude she had in First Class to now barely shapeshifting into her blue scaly form, and nagging Charles all the time about his mismanagement of the X-Men, leading to the most cringeworthy line of dialogue in the X-Men movies since "I'm the Juggernaut, bitch!"
The women are always saving the men around here. You might want to think about changing the name to X-Women.
Look, it's not a shock to see an X-Men adaptation trying to make some timely political commentary, but that line just felt like Jennifer Lawrence brought in her buddy Amy Schumer to write some dialogue for her, even though the rest of the men on this team appear to be pulling their weight just fine. So you would be better off renaming yourselves Captain Geach and the Strip Shack Shooters than calling yourselves the X-Women when your team is not all women. Hashtag not all X-Men! Now I must give my next point in favor of The Last Stand, for having the more suspenseful build up to Jean Grey unleashing her inner Phoenix, while Dark Phoenix has Jean having her first big mental breakdown amidst this campfire with the students that has a musical performance from Dazzler. Yes, the disco-based Marvel superhero who was falsely rumored to be played by Taylor Swift in the new Deadpool movie is actually making her cinematic debut here, lighting up the sky while singing some generic electro-pop tune that doesn't sound like it would be composed in the same era that gave us Nirvana and Pearl Jam. At least have Dazzler singing something from the CNC Music Factory. Xavier heads off to Cerebro with Hank and Raven to inform them he secretly put some mental barriers in young Jean's head to prevent her from knowing she was responsible for her mother's fatal crash.
Those walls that I erected are being torn down.
And the movie does actually try to keep this as a consistent plot thread, instead of how The Last Stand only confronted Xavier's mental manipulation of Jean in one scene before Patrick Stewart ended up dying in the very next scene. No! Another point in Dark Phoenix's favor.
For God's sake, Charles.
So with her trauma newly unraveled, Jean knocks out Scott and makes her way out of the X-Mansion to go back to her childhood home, where she finds her dad alive and well and played by Leonardo DiCaprio's brother from Killers of the Flower Moon, whom Jean discovers gave his daughter up to the professor without letting her know he was still alive.
I was 8 years old. How could you do that to me?
You want to come in? Come all the way in.
Whoa there, Mr. Gray. Save the mental incest sex for one of the R-rated X-Men spin-offs. Sophie Turner has seen enough incestuous banging on Game of Thrones, thank you very much. The X-Men fly in to intervene on Jean's mental breakdown, which gives her the same CGI spaghetti hair as Javier Bardem in Pirates of the Caribbean 5, as well as Sophie Turner's native British accent.
I don't have a home. You made sure of that.
But all the X-Men find themselves powerless up against her, and it's up to our dear friend Mystique to bring her back from the mental brink. Even though these two had like one line of dialogue together in that last movie.
When it comes, people get hurt.
I'm not giving this on you, Jean. This is what family does.
And in a shocking twist that was all but revealed in the movie's own damn trailer, Raven/Mystique has been accidentally thrown through a nearby plank of wood, much in the same way that Wolverine was killed in Logan.
This is what it feels like.
Well, Deadpool does not need to worry about digging up Mystique's body to bring her back to the MCU. Because Jennifer Lawrence has felt so checked out in these past two films that you're frankly relieved to have her head out already so she can go make another prestige movie whose plot is a clunky metaphor for climate change, where she'd obviously be much happier. Still, I am gonna miss seeing those two lovebirds together. No, not Beast and Mystique. I meant Nicholas Hoult and Jennifer Lawrence. I really thought those two were gonna make it together in this crazy world. They look so happy together in those pictures that got leaked off of her phone. And wouldn't you know it, the other X-Men member whose career got big between movies got himself seriously injured during the big Phoenix fight. Meaning that Quicksilver is going to be sidelined for the rest of the movie, recovering in the ICU. The MCU. It's kind of like how The Last Stand also disposed of two of its cast members before we'd even gotten to the film's halfway point, proving that Simon Kinberg is unfamiliar with the phrase, those who don't learn from history are Doctor Doomed to repeat it. And how is it that Storm can't do anything about this rain during Mystique's funeral, yet her later funeral for Professor X was on a bright sunny day? Poor Hank is gonna smell like wet dog when they go back inside the mansion to film their cameo for Deadpool 2. So with Jean Grey bereft over Raven's blood left on her shirt, even though she got no blood on her shirt in that last scene, she seeks the unlikely help of the X-Men's most consistent friend/foe of the franchise, Eric Lensher, aka Magneto, played once more by Michael F. Fassbender. While Ian McKellen's portrayal of Magneto in X3 is, of course, amazing, Fassbender looks just as enthusiastic to be back as Jennifer Lawrence was, even though that kind of works for where his character is in his life.
How did you stop?
I've lived with vengeance my whole life.
Having lost one family to the Holocaust, then another family to a police shooting, and now being given by the US government his very own island for misfit mutants named Genosha.
We have a legal right to be here.
Well, anyone who saw what went down with Genosha on X-Men 97 recently knows that trouble is heading Magneto's way. when some soldiers fly in looking to bring Jean Grey into custody, and Jean's glowing face veins shine once more to help her attack the military helicopters and have herself a duel of stupid-looking expressions with Magneto. Kill Michael Fassbender looks like he's got himself the taco shit. X-Men, welcome to die! Maria! I can't hold it! Unfortunately, it's Jean's attacks on the police and army that get mutants yet again deemed a danger to society by the government, with the president even cutting off his phone line to Xavier so that incoming President Clinton can use it for booty calls. This is some prime dramatic territory to build a final X-Men prequel around. And yet, this movie blows it when it comes to the film's actual villains. A race of shape-shifting aliens named the Dabari, who have landed in the backyard of one Margaret Smith, played by James McAvoy's It co-star Jessica Chastain, dyeing her red hair white to look like every other Tilda Swinton character, whose body gets snatched by the aliens' leader, known simply as Book. No word on whether her last name is Yu.
Fuck you!
Book and her fellow aliens disguised as fashion models could very well be the worst villains I've seen in the X-Men franchise. Even worse than Oscar Isaac doing glorified Ivan Ooze cosplay, or the Juggernaut, bitch! Her big evil plot is to emotionally manipulate the vulnerable Jean Grey by promising to help rein in her fiery powers, with some more of that girl boss feminism dialogue.
Are you a scared little girl who answers to a man in a chair?
They're coming to kill you. You're not gonna let them. You're gonna fight back.
And explains that alien energy that went inside Jean's body is the same thing that killed her home planet. In an exposition-heavy scene that feels an awful lot like Matt Damon's shitty crypto commercial. All while she delivers her dialogue in a flat HAL 9000 voice that allows her to have no fun with this cardboard part.
I can use that.
Hell, she looked more like a terrifying alien from space when she played Tammy Faye Baker. Oh, and Hank just got so fed up with Xavier's bullshit that he's packing his bags for the island of Genosha to ally himself with Magneto and give him some bad news.
Do it for Raven. Did she send you? Raven's dead.
Perfection? And while it should feel badass to see Magneto once again donning that helmet to try and take out Jean Grey himself in New York City, his visible eye roll towards the X-Men just about sums up our feelings about now.
I'm sorry for what she did.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
That eye roll is the visual representation of superhero movie fatigue.
Sorry, Charles. There's always a speech, but nobody cares anymore.
Is that Magneto talking, or just Michael Fassbender having an existential crisis after the dual flops of Assassin's Creed and The Snowman?
Nobody cares anymore.
You know what? Screw this whole scoring system. The reason that The Last Stand is ultimately the better film than Dark Phoenix is that it has some epic scale and drama to it, from the investment we had made in the X-Men over the original trilogy, while there is simply not enough for the younger X-Men to do here to prove themselves worthy of the roles. Sure, Ty Sheridan as Cyclops has far more lines than James Marsden's Cyclops did before his premature death, but most of that dialogue is just him simping for Jean Grey all the damn time.
If you touch her, I will fucking kill you.
Yeah, how about you repeat that line wearing a wife beater and adding the word, bro? And not only does Last Stand have Kelsey Grammer in the incredible casting of the elder Hank McCoy, but it had Hugh Jackman as the goddamn Wolverine, for whom Dark Phoenix is the only X-Men movie over 19 years that has no Logan whatsoever, even with him appearing in the previous 3 prequels.
Go fuck yourself.
His absence, emphasis on abs, can't help but be felt here, especially when the most notable new X-Man we've got on Magneto's side is the alpha male vampire guy from 30 Days of Night as a dude with sentient dreadlocks. Yes, he's got the hybrid of Medusa and the Predator atop his fucking head. How is he lamer than Dazzler? Plus, this underdeveloped Phoenix plotline simply does not work with what little we have invested in Sophie Turner's Jean Grey, with not even one mention of her having brought out the Phoenix already in that last movie.
Walk to me.
Please. My God, she's making Professor X do a TikTok dance several decades before smartphones or TikTok will even exist. This is when the X-Men get taken down and taken in on a train to mutant jail by a police force known as the MCU. Not the TVA, they really are called the MCU. A none too subtle hint from Simon Kinberg as to why his originally planned third act battle in space between Jean Grey and the aliens ended up getting scrapped by Fox and forced to be reshot by Kinberg, with the X-Men and these prison guards now facing off against the aliens invading their train, supposedly due to the original ending similarities to the MCU's upcoming Captain Marvel. Also about a race of shape-shifting aliens landing on Earth during the 1990s to chase after a woman with space-based superpowers. This probably explains why Dark Phoenix's 1990s period detail is next to non-existent, compared to Captain Marvel's embrace of the retro 90s aesthetic and soundtrack, and why the Dabari have far less character or substance than the Skrulls did in the MCU. And while the action feels awfully flat in comparison to Matthew Vaughn's stylish action way back in First Class, this is far from the worst reshoot that Simon Kinberg's been a part of on a Fox Marvel movie, with one cool moment involving Magneto doing that floating gun thing he'd do later in the first film, and Nightcrawler having a downright amazing moment after a prison guard who told Kurt about his son being a fan of his gets killed by an alien, throwing him into a berserker rage worthy of Wolverine and transporting the guard's killer outside the train to get run over by it. Now I want this Nightcrawler to not only come back to the MCU, but also get his own Disney Plus series with Daredevil and the Punisher. Meanwhile, Xavier has a psychic huddle amidst the fight with the young Jean Grey, where he gets her to say the magic word of the movie.
All I ever wanted was to protect you.
I know what I need to do now. Protect my family.
Yes, the very same family cliche that has fueled many a Fast and Furious sequel, and which was mentioned earlier in Raven's last words to Jean, has now resurrected her from her coma to save the X-Men by flowing them away in psychic bubbles that make them look like they're playing a real-life version of Super Monkey Ball, before she proceeds to evaporate all the Dabari herself to the epic orchestrations of Hans Zimmer. Yes, that Hans Zimmer, who came out of his retirement from superhero movies after Batman vs. Superman to end up doing the music for both Dark Phoenix and Wonder Woman 1984. To be fair though, Zimmer's music is the only thing getting you excited for this final fight between Jean Grey and Vuk.
Your emotions make you weak.
My emotions make me strong.
Where the rest of the X-Men just sort of stand around looking confused, while these two fly all the way up into space and Jean sucks all the life out of her alien foe before she explodes into the form of a flaming fiery phoenix.
She's right.
To paraphrase the final lines of dialogue from Ernest Goes to Jail, she came, she saw, she got blown up. Unless, of course, Sophie Turner gets herself a huge pile of money in the future from Kevin Feige and Ryan Reynolds to come back as the next Marvel Jesus. Then we flash forward with Jean's posthumous narration explaining how the X-Men will live on after her death. Scott renames the school in his dead girlfriend's honor. Peter has recovered from his injuries to resume alongside the X-Men instead of explaining that whole Magneto's my dad thing he was teasing in the past two movies. Hank has become the school's new dean alongside a picture of his beloved Mystique that was clearly taken of Jennifer Lawrence in a hurry on the same day they were filming her death scene. And the newly retired Charles Xavier is at a cafe in Paris where he's visited by his old frenemy Eric, who offers to play with Charles a round of the board game they were seen playing later in the original trilogy. But no, goddammit, I was talking about chess. It's one of the few notes that I can admit is a poignant capper to McAvoy and Fassbender's excellent chemistry as Xavier and Magneto these past 8 years. Which, ironically, is how much longer these X-Men have left to go before they respectively age into Jean-Luc Picard, Gandalf the Grey, and Sideshow Bob. The only way these movies have taken place over 30 fucking years is if these X-Men are using the same youth serum as Paul Rudd. And while Chris Claremont of the original Dark Phoenix comics makes a cameo in the crowd of this White House party, Stan Lee sadly missed out on one last cameo in the X-Men franchise before his death in 2018. With this movie paying tribute to Mr. Lee by placing him in tiny font alongside the rest of the cast and crew credits at the end. Not even so much as a post-credit tile card for Stan the Man. Well, God forbid how the new Deadpool movie would have treated Simon Kinberg if he had passed away before its release.
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the Store tab on any of our JoBlo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
With Dark Phoenix the only X-Men prequel to run under 2 hours, that made it all the easier for fans to easily forget this flick before the X-Men's interdimensional reset in the MCU, with Evan Pierce's Quicksilver appearing on WandaVision, Patrick Stewart's Professor X returning in the Multiverse of Madness, and Kelsey Grammer back as the CGI Beast in an end credits cameo for, what do you know, the sequel to Captain Marvel. And while longtime X-Men producer Lauren Schuler-Donner would disavow both Dark Phoenix and New Mutants on her Twitter account, Simon Kinberg would take creative responsibility for the film's disappointment, while pointing the finger towards Fox for hollowing out their marketing department before their Disney merger, and forcing him to work on a smaller scale after Apocalypse's disappointment, which is not what a first-time director needs to make a satisfactory superhero finale coming out just 1 month after Endgame set that bar impossibly high. Along with such previous X-Men spin-offs as the Deadpool movies and Logan showing far more creative backbone with their R ratings than with Dark Phoenix giving us the same old PG-13 shit. There are clearly signs of promise in Kinberg's script that may have been better if he got to make his planned trilogy, but Dark Phoenix as it stands is just such a morose flop of a finale that's an even farther cry from the epic tone of the original comic storyline than X-Men 3, with the Dark Phoenix storyline at least being adapted well on the original X-Men cartoon. And with the MCU having brought back both Hugh Jackman and Robert Downey Jr. from their superhero retirements, who knows if the younger X-Men lineup will one day get themselves a far better finale from the MCU than whatever they got with Dark Phoenix. Just so long as there's a chance they get to follow their original plan of teaming up with Channing Tatum as Gambit.
How long I've been waiting for this. Woo, I'm about to make a name for myself, yeah.
On the enjoyableness continuum scale from full to Bruce, X-Men Dark Phoenix is enough to make you lose faith in the X-Men universe just before Marvel Jesus ends up renewing it all over again. And Magneto's It's Cerebro with a 4 out of 10. Oh, but one more point in Dark Phoenix's favor, having absolutely no Brett Ratner involved whatsoever. I'm Jesse Shade for JoBlo.com, and thanks again for watching our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe to the JoBlo Originals channel. Tell all your friends who like this sort of content, and turn on the bell to receive notifications for all our latest videos. We are an independent company that appreciates all of your support. And I would like to dedicate this review in memory of the one character we'll miss the most from this bygone era of 20th Century Fox's Marvel Universe.
X-Men, X-Men, this is the day, this is the day.